You are listening to Our Stories Matter, brought to you by Trauma Informed LA. Our Stories Matter presents Season 5, We Will Dance Again. This season, Dr. Miri Bar-Halpern, Director of the Intensive Outpatient Program at the Boston Child Study Center and lecturer at Harvard Medical School, and I'm Susie Hess, Associate Professor of Practicum Education at USC Suzanne Dworak Peck School of Social Work and co-founder of Trauma Informed LA, share our experiences of witnessing a mosaic of trauma and resilience during war. We joined an academic solidarity mission to Israel alongside 30 faculty members from Stanford, Harvard, Dartmouth, and a group of Italian activists. In this season, we will interview Jews, Arabs, and Christians to share their tapestry of hope and resilience during times of war. Our hope is to foster compassion, understanding, and knowledge about trauma and post-traumatic growth. So welcome to Our Stories Matter, We Will Dance Again. I'm Susie Hess, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Miri Bar-Halpern. Today, we'll be discussing our personal experiences with the war, the rise of anti-Semitism, and our hopes to bridge the deep divides that have formed, especially on college campuses. We're committed to creating spaces for collective healing, and today's episode is part of that effort. We hope this conversation and our conversations with all of our guests will inspire the kind of unity that can dismantle polarization and promote community engagement. Why don't we just begin by telling everyone who we were before October 7th?
So I'm an Israeli Jew. I moved to the United States about 16 years ago for my doctorate in clinical psychology, and I devoted my life to understand trauma. Funny enough, my dissertation was actually about trauma related to terrorism. I wrote a book that was supposed to help children who were exposed to terrorist attack, and not in a million years, I thought that a book that I wrote for 12 years ago will still be relevant today. I grew up in Peck in Israel, which is a city outside of Tel Aviv. I met my American non-Jewish husband here in my second year of school. Have two beautiful kids that I raised here and a dog. And kind of living the idea of what it's like to be an immigrant in a country where I went from being the majority to being a minority. So struggling with that a little bit. And then everything changed after October 7th in terms of my own identity, where I used to see myself, when you ask me, who are you? I would say, I'm a psychologist, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I am, a trauma expert, to now I've noticed that when people ask me who I am, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli. And that's something that I never experienced before October 7th, kind of like that idea of my identity as a Jewish person, yet along an Israeli, is now at the front, whether I want it to be or not. It's there. A little bit more background, I guess. So I am a third-generation Holocaust survivors. Both of my grandparents on both sides survived the Holocaust. My dad he's a psychiatrist who specializes in Holocaust survivor and second and third generation. So I grew up with a lot of talking about trauma, and there's definitely a deep understanding of intergenerational trauma. So that's part of what I bring to the table. And we're going to talk a lot in this podcast about what is trauma, but more specifically, what is post-traumatic growth, which is something I'm very interested in. And the idea of how can we move from being victims to surviving, to thriving, being resilient, bouncing back, to actually growing from the trauma by giving it meaning. I'm not religious. I'm a cultural Jew. I think people don't know that, but as an Israeli, there is a lot of diversity among us. Israelis, we're people of color. And I remember when people tell me, you're white, I'm like, I'm not white. I'm Middle Eastern. I'm actually olive. And I constantly have conversation about that. I'm a secular Jew. I love the traditions of being Jewish. I think Judaism is we're people. Right? It's not a religion as much as for me, it's a culture and connection to my country and to the people in my country. That's everything that I thought about myself before October 7th. And then life changed.
Oh my gosh, that was super beautiful and powerful. We have
similar experiences and really different. So I was raised as a Reformed Jew or secular Jew in the Midwest of this country. My family attended synagogue only during the high holidays. It was rare that we all even went together. Usually my dad would take me and my brother. Although there weren't many in my small, suburban town, everyone knew who we were. So I tended to try to assimilate because I do have white skin. And I rarely discuss my identity. I'm a second generation Russian Jew. And as I said, I'm white passing. So again, when people say I'm white, I'm not white. I'll say I'm Jewish with white skin. I had traveled to Israel in 1992 prior to my trip with you in 2024. And it's interesting because while I have always identified as a secular Jew, which means an ethnic Jew rather than a religious one, I was always taught to conceal my identity for safety. Especially when I was traveling, you never mentioned anything about being Jewish. And if we were going to carry a menorah, traveling for whatever reason, it would go in our suitcase, not our carry-on.
Wait. Why would you carry a menorah when you're traveling?
Okay, so this is a crazy story too, because my brother lives in Spain. He actually wanted to, bring a menorah back, one of our family menorahs. So when he was traveling to Spain, my parents were like, well, don't put the menorah in your carry-on, put it in your suitcase. He's like, of course I'm putting it in my suitcase. So it was and you don't wear any Jewish bling. I'm wearing Jewish bling now, post October 7th. And so I was always taught to conceal my identity. So the crazy part I find is that following October 7th, so the largest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, and with anti-Semitism increasing by nearly 400% in this country, I made the decision to embrace my identity. So I am definitely more Jewy. For the first time, I bought a Star of David. I have bought, a t-shirt from one of our guests, Eitan, called I'm Not Jew. So I'm outwardly wanting to come out of hiding. And part of me is God, it's a relief to come out. And it's also the opposite of how I was raised.
It's so interesting. Part of my spiel when I see new patients, I would always, before October 7th, I would always say, you're going to hear my accent, especially when I'm tired because I'm Israeli, and I'm more direct because I'm Israeli, but with compassion. It was always part of my spiel of this is who I am. And now when I'm seeing new patients, I pause. It took me a while to go back to be able to say that, who I am. So it's interesting. You're saying you are more out there. To me, I feel like after October 7th, I went inside and then something switched again because I'm loud and proud, so I can't hide. But it took me a while to get there. It took me a while to navigate this energy go against that urge of hiding to go back to, I'm not going to let them win. I'm nobody. Nobody's going to put baby in the corner, basically, right? I'm not going to hide. And it has a toll, right? I think there is something about being loud and fighting that it comes with a price.
And I think it's interesting that as I'm thinking about us too, that you were raised in a country where, like you said, you were part of a majority. I've never experienced being part of a majority until I traveled to Israel. And in 1992, I wasn't as connected, to be honest. In 2024, when I met you, I was so relieved. I mean, yes, there's a war there, but there's a war here. I felt safer in the war there, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. And, just a sneak peek, we have a few guests that, for example, Dr. Yehuda Price, right? He's talking about how as a Black person in America, he feels more at home in Israel.
Yes, that's right. And what he has said to me in the past is that he has experienced more anti-Semitism than racism as a Black man who identifies as an Orthodox Jew.
You'll hear him in our podcast.
Yes, he's amazing, as everyone is amazing.
I would love to hear from you as well. Like what happened? I'm like, even now I'm saying October 7th and my mind goes like, what happened that day? I know for me, I woke up around 6:15 because young kids, they wake me up early. It was a Saturday. And my friend was actually traveling. She was from San Diego and she traveled. So she stayed with us. And I remember I walked out of my room, not to wake up Derek, my husband, and I looked at my phone and it was blowing with WhatsApps of, okay, something big is happening. I just froze. I'm like, what is going on? And at the same time, my friend was coming out of the guest room and we stared at each other. And it was like this moment of what? Like this disbelief. And then checking. Is everybody okay? Is my family okay? Is my brother okay? Are my friends okay? What is happening? And at that point, people still didn't know what was happening. I mean, it took a while. It took several hours, a day even, to really figure out the magnitude of the massacre of October 7th. And I just remember that state of freeze, of not knowing, and fear, this deep core fear, like, like that. Sometimes when you have like this rush of cold sweat out of nowhere, that's how I felt. Like, and at the same time, I have two young kids and I didn't want to scare them, and trying to navigate being a parent in that situation, and really having a hard time hiding how I'm feeling. And I remember I came upstairs and I went to my bedroom, and Derek came after me, and I just fell on the floor and I just sobbing because all the movies started to come from Hamas. All those movies of what they were doing. And I just remember I was shaking and he was holding me. And I was just telling him, I don't understand. How can they do that? How can someone be so cruel? How can they do that to babies and kids? And there was that one video when they were, one of the hostages, Yagil, the now 12-year-old, and you see a mass of people, civilians, they were just pushing him and punching him. And my mind could not grab that. And, there was the shock and there was the disbelief on October 7th. And, and then what happened, I went into state, I need to do something because that's who I am. So I wrote on the Israeli Facebook group, I wrote a message saying, if anybody needs support, here's my cell phone, which was not smart because I got so many phone calls from the Israeli community here that I became even more overwhelmed. But it was, people called me, and I've never met them. The only connection we had is we're both on a Facebook Israeli group of Massachusetts. And it was panic. What do I do? How do I help my family? Should I go back to Israel to reserve? Like literally all of those questions of people that I've never spoken with before. And a few other psychologists and other clinicians contacted me, Israelis, and we formed this group of 10 clinicians and just started to provide free mental health support for the Israeli community here. And that was amazing because that gave me the first step of meaning, like the first thing of something that I can actually do. And we did that throughout the year of just providing one-on-one and group therapy and webinar and all of that. And it was wonderful, but I also became very aware of what's happening. And it's almost like you take the red pill and you go down the matrix, right?
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden, for me, who did not grow up here, that heard about anti-Semitism from my grandparents, all of a sudden, I was fully aware of the magnitude of anti-Semitism and hate around me, which, triggered my own trauma network. Because, I lived through times where all the stories I heard from my grandparents are unfolding in front of my eyes. It was insane. And it started, Susie, to go to the point of I started to doubt everything I grew up on. So, when you constantly hear Israel it's an apartheid state, and, there's apartheid, there's genocide, we're colonized, white, supreme, whatever. I grew up there. And, there's a part of you who knows this is not true. But then when you hear it from everywhere, you started to think, well, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe everything I was told was a lie. And I started to do for my own sanity, this deep dive, not a TikTok dive, but an actual open the book deep dive kind of thing.
Great.
People don't do that.
No.
And I started reading. And I had to do that to go back to my sense of sanity to know that, I grew up, I went to like Seats for Peace and like, Jews and Arabs together. So I needed to remind myself that this actually happened and that my history is my history and it's true, because I felt like I was going insane. And on top of that, October 8th, everybody hates you. Nobody lets you grieve. There was like this denial of your pain as a Jewish person that I've never experienced in my life, where because you're a Jew, what you say not only doesn't matter, you're lying. Prove it. And then we go and reprove it. No, that's not true. That's propaganda. And everywhere around me, I felt like was a battlefield, and I'm not even in Israel.
It's amazing to me, like just hearing you, and I feel like I could sort of ugly cry because your words are always like so on point with my feelings, and you're much better expressing yourself than I am, I think. Not I think, for sure. I think it's incredibly, the war, here on October 8th, I assumed, I was an advocate for groups that were not my group. So I was constantly advocating and putting myself out there. And I think I never thought it was going to happen to us. Like you said, in terms of grandparents always talking about anti-Semitism. My dad always thought everyone was anti-Semitic if they were like sort of pushing back on something. I'm like, Dad, that is like World War II thoughts. And so the fact that I am experiencing it, October 8th, I experienced it also. A colleague said from the river to the sea to me on October 8th. And at that time, I still was in fight, freeze, or flee. I feel like now I'm in fight mode. But at that time, I was in freeze response. I think the podcast was born out of a need to share and create space for dialogue and healing after the events of October 7th. So I love who we are together because me, being a Jewish American academic, being second generation, I've seen how polarization and misinformation create barriers to empathy among my colleagues, students. And so I loved connecting with you about, we wanted to bridge the gap between Jews, Arabs, and Christians by sharing stories that reflect our common humanity. So the intention behind the podcast is to foster understanding, not just through intellectual discussions, but through our lived experiences. And I think it's important now more than ever because the trauma of October 7th has impacted so many lives. And I think because of platforms like this, if we didn't have this, we would lose the chance to heal collectively, to coexist with grief. And I think the two of us coming from different backgrounds, like me from academia, you from mental health, authoring a children's book on terrorism, we bring sort of the yin and yang. My thought, and I'm wondering if it's the same as yours, is we aim to bridge divides and understand the tapestry of a grief together.
Yeah, grief is interesting. I think that what we go through right now is a grief reaction, right? You mentioned there's the denial, there is anger, and then there is this disbelief, just like the whole stages of grief, basically. And part of me think that until we sit with the sadness, which is what happened to me, I was like, it was all of it, all the emotions together. And, there's this theory called the trauma network, right? So when someone feel immense sadness while feeling invalidated again and again and again, it leads to this feeling of helplessness. And when you combine those together, when those are conditioned together, then that can lead to trauma. That's traumatic invalidation, right? And the way of trying to gain control or to feel more grounded, we tend to go to those secondary emotions of either anxiety, right? I'm just going to avoid the situation, anger, people think attack, it's actually defend, right? I'm going to defend my values, or shame, right? Hiding. And this is, by the way, something that, where I work, Dr. Ryan Madigan, he talks a lot about this theory of the trauma network. And it's so true because I went through avoidance. I went through the anger. I still am angry. And then there's the shame, which I think is also related to intergenerational trauma, because as Jewish people, we don't talk about it, right? We hide, but we're not going to show you. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to, even as a community, it can be sometimes invalidating. We're just going to do what we're doing, or we're not going to tell you how much we're suffering because we're not going to show you that we're weak as well. So I think until there's some radical acceptance that there is an actual sadness and an actual loss, and if people would just let us grieve, I mean, we're recording this, it's a year after October 7th. And on October 7th, 2024, again, we were robbed of our ability to grieve on college campuses in the US, right? Like,
Yes.
In what place they can't even let people recognize the pain?
We have not had the opportunity to grieve because then we went into defense and to fight and to advocate. And it's so interesting because I was thinking this morning before we started about our epigenetics, and I was thinking, okay, I was already raised with fear. Like, you have to be safe. You have to be safe. Don't disclose who you are. And I was, my parents were like, just so paranoid. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that is how I feel. And then I think, oh, the epigenetics now of October 7th and the DNA moving forward into Israelis and Israeli Arabs, Israeli Christians, Israeli Jews, and American Jews, like how we're going to be in the future, how our children are going to be in the future.
And one more thing I would say about the grief piece, that the loss and grief, I mean, I feel it now. I've been feeling it in the last year, literally every part of my identity. My body was achy out of pain because of loss. And there's something that happened on October 7th that I'm not proud of. Hamas stole a really high value for me. They stole my compassion. I used to see myself as a very, in terms of my value system, being compassionate is very high value. And the fact that I stole that part of my identity was also part of my grief and sadness, because all of a sudden, that's not who I am. And it took me a while to do what we call opposite action or opposite to urge, which, just I'm not going to look at the other side because I can't take it right now. And I don't know if I shared this with you. In our neighborhood, there is a restaurant that the owner is an immigrant from Gaza. And before October 7th, I would go there all the time because, hey, that's the only somewhat normal shawarma I can get here. Real pita.
Right.
And we were fine. And he knew that I was Israeli. And it was like, hey, neighbor, literally. And it took me a while. And in November, I asked a friend to come with me. And I said, I needed for myself to restore my values and my compassion. And I decided to go there and just ask him how's his family if he's okay. And I was shaking. I was literally, my heart was beating so fast. And I went there with my friend and I said, I just wanted to see if you're okay and how's your family? And he started ranting about Israel and how they're committing a genocide. And I was like, I froze again, because here I am trying to be vulnerable because I believe that vulnerability is courage and I always lead with vulnerability, and I'm being shut down again.
Oh no.
And it was kind of like a slap in the face. But the thing is that I realized that I don't have the capacity to lean in every single day like that and hold everything all the time on that emotional level, because it's still a battlefield. And I'm fighting, but I'm fighting and I have limited resources right now. So I guess what I realize is that it's a choice that I'm making, and it's a choice I need to make every single day to be compassionate and to remind myself the good in other people. But the fact that I remind myself this is under my control, I choose to be compassionate. I choose to not give into hate. And, one of our amazing people that's going to be on this podcast is Lucy Arish. And she was saying how, and I live by what she said. She said, it's much harder than forgive and love. It's easier to hate. And I choose to live with compassion and lean in with forgiveness and love because those are my values. But this is really, really hard. It takes a lot.
It takes a lot. And I love everything you said, and that giving permission that we're not going to always be in that place every day. Because I think I'm hard on myself when I cannot do it, and hearing your story, I did not know that story. And hearing that story, I think it also gives permission that there are days that we are going to have a lot of compassion, empathy, and there's going to be moments or hours or days that we're not. And I want to have self-compassion, and I get hard on myself. I have to prepare as if I'm going into like an emotional battle, which, I've done that many times, like with it since October 7th within, academia, preparing for meetings. And I prepare for hours so that I can be regulated, so I can have compassion, so I can have empathy, so I can have facts. It's hours of preparing. And even doing this episode now with you, I think, there's a healing aspect of it because now it's a year later. And then I feel like I could start like crying hard, like the ugly cry at any moment. And of course, I'm glad it's with you. Okay, so let's talk about the academic delegation that we went to Israel where we met. Okay, so the purpose of the academic delegation to Israel was to support Israeli scholars facing boycotts. So faculty from Harvard, Stanford, Dartmouth, Italian activists, and I, being the only person from USC, gathered in Israel to bear witness. So over 4 days, we spent 12 hours each day listening to testimonies from students, faculty, soldiers, families of hostages, and standing in solidarity with those impacted. So my hope, and I believe yours as well, Miri, was to bring back all these powerful stories. You actually suggested that we do the podcast when we were in Israel. But once we arrived, we realized this was not possible. You were so sick the entire trip.
I was. But I was in denial. I was like, I'm not sick. This is not fever. I'm just shaking and it's really hot and cold at the same time.
Yeah, I could not believe what you were doing. And you and I were going to be presenting together, and you were going to like everything, and you were so sick. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know how that was happening. And then I jumped into my trauma response of like silence and disassociating. So I'm like, I'm not going to be like in the moment doing a podcast. I could barely have any conversations with anyone except for you. So yeah. And it's interesting because in the States, I've been fighting in Israel because I was bearing witness to so much terror, 12 hours a day. I just went into freeze response, and yeah, I just couldn't do it. And it was interesting because you also, okay, going back for a minute. So we never knew each other before we like met in a war zone. You reached out to me because you heard that, I was part of Trauma Informed LA, and you're like, hey, do you want to present while we're in Israel together? And I didn't know you at all when you sent me that email. And I was like, sure. I mean, I didn't ask any questions. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So that was it. And I was so happy to have, like, I already felt sort of like a sisterly connection with you. I mean, I was definitely intimidated, like when I looked at your resume.
Oh no. What?
Yeah. And then you were being humble and saying, no, no, no. And then I was like, oh, okay, she's probably just like, really down to earth and humble, which you are. But then the more I get to know you, the more I realized I was right to be intimidated because your resume is intense.
Oh my God, stop.
So that was sort of like my coherent, non-coherent, like narrative of how we met.
Wow, this is our love story. But wait, before we get to that, I'm intrigued to know. I mean, so when we've met, I landed a little bit after you. You already went to the Nova.
Oh, yeah.
Right? What was it like to me, this is for me, it's like, okay, I'm going back home and I'm seeing my country in a different way. But what's it like for you going back after so many years going back to Israel, like, what was your reaction? How did you feel?
I was definitely in a different place. I mean, sort of landing and seeing all the images of all the hostages and people who were already murdered in the airport. So that was the beginning. And part of me was, okay, I'm at a place that people are talking about this freely and grieving together. Then going on the streets and seeing like huge life-size teddy bears with like blood, representing all the children who were murdered, who were being held in captivity. You and I went to get coffee one day, and the menu was called "Bring Them Home." And so it was sort of chilling. I think I just felt like I experienced just being chilled to the bone every day. But the difference between there and here was that it was collectively,
So interesting. I've been looking for a community since October 7th because I felt like I lost a lot of friends and I lost my community.
Yeah.
This is part of the whole traumatic invalidation I was talking about before, like that idea of, when someone keeps telling you, no, your thoughts are crazy, you're crazy, you're starting to doubt yourself. And especially when it's coming from your close surrounding.
Yeah.
And one of the ways for me of managing traumatic invalidation, which is, by the way, one of the things that has not been studied on Jewish people. And one of the things I was trying to do is show how, just like any other marginalized group, traumatic invalidation actually applies to the Jewish community after October 7th. But one of the things I was doing is trying to find a community. And for me, going back home to Israel, I felt like it was a different country. It started, like you said, you go down at Ben Gurion Airport and you see all the faces. And for me, I worked really, really slow. I just stopped and I wanted to give respect to every face of hostage, murdered person, every name. And I slowed down. And then, I saw my parents for the first time since October 7th, and it just hugging them in this relief that they're alive, because one of the things that happened after October 7th is the understanding that it literally could have been any one of us.
Yeah.
Any one of us. So being with them and then, going straight to the hotel for the delegation. So I joined the delegation because I felt guilt that I'm not doing enough. I was doing a lot here, but I was not doing anything in Israel for my country. And that sense of I can do more, which is why, when we were there, it was really important for me, like, to organize, like, the mental health panel or the anti-Semitism panel, like, use my resources to bring back people to create collaboration and to foster more discussion, because that was under my control. This is something that I can do. And it gave me a sense of, again, meaning. But it was a different country. And, I remember sitting in restaurants, and the restaurants are full because that's what Israelis do, right? Like, we go out no matter what because, you would not let us go down, right? I remember right, that night, and it's like, you're like, why is it so packed?
I can't believe it. I'm like, I would be in fetal position, but people are still sad and they're still going out to eat.
Yes, because that notion of we will not let you in, Am Yisrael Chai, is there. Which, by the way, for some people can be also, Jewish people, Israeli people can feel very invalidating by itself, because if they can't make it, they can't be the one who go out. That can be really threatening. But yes, Am Yisrael Chai, and this is what we do. But for me, when you said that, we're like, I can't believe everybody's out. What I saw was the sadness. I looked around me and people were not, they're out, but there were zombies. They were not enjoying themselves. Everything was slowing down with grief and sadness. And you can see in the hollow, like the eyes were just hollow, right? And then for me, one of the most profound moments was going to see hostage squares. There's this place in Israel that is now dedicated to the hostages. And people bring their art and their different ways of showing their sadness and grief. And it's one of those places that I think it's the saddest place in the world. There was grief that it's like grief painted a picture where helplessness and hope go hand in hand with longing to bring them home, and anger, and it's everything, all the emotions. They're so raw. I mean, there is Hamas tunnel exhibition, like they have like a tunnel there that you go through, and you hear the bangs, and you can imagine it's horrible, right? Like you place yourself instead of the hostages because you feel the pain, and it's my country, right? And it's the home where I used to feel safe. Because for me, growing up in Israel, I didn't realize I was traumatized. I mean, that's a different story. Only when I moved to the US, I realized, oh, how I grew up was not normal. You mean you don't want to see what's in my bag when I go to the mall? Or, when there's something in the street, you don't automatically think it's a bomb? Because I grew up in the Second Intifada. So, taking the bus is scary. And only when I moved to the US, I remember I went to a party and in Connecticut, it's not New York, so the party, it ends. 1 o'clock in the morning, lights are on. And I took cover. It was my first party, and I took cover because I thought something happened. And then I realized, even though I didn't see myself as traumatized, I grew up in an abnormal environment. And when you took me out of that environment, my normal became abnormal. But when I was there, I felt safe. This was, for me, the safest place in the world was Israel.
Right.
So I came back to a completely different country where you don't feel safe anymore. There's no safety.
There's no safety. That's so interesting because, now I'm looking back, and I worked at Jewish organizations in my past. And we always walked through X-ray machines. We always had our bags searched. We always had bomb threats. I was on the 12th floor, and we had to walk down the stairwell. So, but that was just, my thought was like, precautions, of course. But I never, ever thought that actually anything in my lifetime would happen, that would all make sense. And when you asked me earlier about Nova, when I went there, and you hadn't arrived yet, I was walking around, and I was looking at all of the memorials and the pictures and all of the youth that were just dancing while hearing rockets. And to this day, I think it's going to take years to really try to understand what I saw and what I heard, and I think the dissonance of being in Israel with all that grief and heaviness, and like you said, you could see the pain in everyone's eyes. And that's probably why I went silent and I was disassociating. It was so hard. And then here, the hate, like all the hatred. And then I go into defense and I go into fight mode. And, and I'm wondering, maybe like you and I can sort of unpack the feelings and perspectives, how they've changed in 1 year since the initial shock and trauma. Like, are there any memories maybe that we could talk about that continue to resonate or haunt us?
So for me, I'm going back to the idea of the community, right? I was trying to find allies because I felt so alone. And again, I'm married to someone who's not Jewish, who, has his own trauma. My father-in-law was a victim of 9/11. So we get terrorism.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we get that. And,
gosh.
And my husband is the most amazing person in the world, and he's so supportive, and he gets it. But I always felt, for a while, I felt that he was getting it on the rational level, not the emotional level. I felt alone even in my own house. And until a moment, which is so sad because I don't want my husband to feel this way, but there was a moment where I told him about it, and he said, "What are you talking about? My kids are Jewish. I took Noam to the library to study because my son takes Hebrew classes, and I can hear them speak Hebrew, and there was this guy who was walking back and forth next to his door, and all I can think about, is he listening to the Hebrew, and is he going to do something to my son?" And when he said that, as much as I felt sadness that he's going through it as well, I felt like, okay, I'm not alone. He really gets it. So I was trying to find allies and people that will not just stand with me, but actually stand for me, like being outstanders, not bystanders. And it's not easy to find them, but like once you spot them, it gives you so much hope, right? And I think you'll see in our podcast, we interview people that are not Jewish and are allies. And I think those episodes specifically just energize me more. Because I think, I think it's important to everyone to educate himself, not from TikTok, again, not from social media. You're going to hear me saying it a lot. Education is power, but actual education. And understand that silence is complicity. You can be silenced. I talked about before how I was going through this roller coaster of emotions, and some days I'm ready to go. Let's do it. Let's fight. And other days I just want to crawl into bed and I feel completely burned out. It's like running this never-ending marathon, but with limited crowd cheering for you to keep going. It's really
Whoa. How is that deep all the time?
well, because I noticed that at work we have consultation team, and I would come a week after week for a real long time, just in pain and in tears. And consultation team is part of it's therapy for the therapist, and how does your life is affecting your patients. And war is going to affect my ability to be a good therapist, right? And I realized after a while that I'm not getting what I should be getting from my team, but part of it was because I'm the only Middle Eastern person there. Sadly, they're not Jewish people there. They are. I'm the only Israeli. I'm the only one that my country, my family, my friends are directly affected by what's going on. So I live this dissonance world where I need to go on with my life, where people around me, they do their thing. And I have this heaviness of, is there a missile? It's going to hurt my family or my friends. So it's this constant hypervigilant. No matter where I go, I am very hypervigilant in a very, very aware way. I'm noticing when I'm activated by my trauma network, and I need to tell myself, you're safe right now, and to bring it back to the here and now. I think that for me, when you're thinking about, like, you asked, what are some moments that I go back to in the last year and since coming back, realizing and accepting that it's going to be this up and down for a while. I mean, I remember celebrating my son's birthday in November 21st, 2023. And it was the dialectic of feeling joy and so much guilt that I get to celebrate my son's birthday when kids are being held hostage. And it was such a difficult day. And there were so many moments like that throughout the years where I had to be able to hold joy and pain at the same time. And it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And on top of that, what I was saying before about constantly being hypervigilant, there's just this toxic stress. What do I do with it? How do I manage that? And I think for me, not being a victim, moving on to being able to grow and give meaning, that this podcast was such an important part of my own healing, still is, because it gave me meaning and something to do. We bring stories. And it also helped me remember that my story matter, that I matter.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Again, I mean, I can feel everything that you have said to the core. And, in the guilt, the part that you said with the guilt, you gave me actually permission in Israel. I forgot to tell you this. But you gave me permission in Israel that if I needed to take a break, I could. And I felt guilty because I was like, people are enduring more than 12 hours a day of testimony. They're actually experiencing the terror. So how could I not take in 12 hours a day of hearing about the terror? So, you were like, you can take a break. This is too much. I always remember you saying, this is too much. This is too much. And so reflecting on the past year since the initial shock and trauma, my feelings and perspectives have shifted significantly. Memories and voices continue to haunt me. So, for example, your nephew Amit, who's on our podcast, who is living through his fourth war as a teenager. I think about Or, who we've interviewed, who's an IDF mental health lieutenant, providing on-ground mental health support during a war. Jonathan, a film instructor at Superior College who we interview. And Superior College has the largest Arab student population in Israel because it's right on the border of Gaza, where many students and faculty were murdered and taken captive. So when colleagues or friends try to be maybe dismissive or they're gaslighting my experiences, I'm reminded of the voices from the podcast. I'm also reminded that this is happening. This is a reality. I mean, I just had a friend recently who said that he doesn't feel like he can, back me as a Jew. And he said, I said, wait, are you saying that I didn't tell you this either. I said, are you saying that you don't support the social media posts? Because I'm constantly posting about it's not okay to use rape as a weapon of war or, just constant. And they're all facts. They're not TikTok. They're all facts and numbers. And he said, no, I agree with everything you post. I just won't be able to back you, the fear of being canceled.
Ugh, that's awful.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. And then I haven't heard from him again. I'm trying to rebuild a community. And so, while this is all so painful, there is a relief of connecting with others, and friends and colleagues who are experiencing the grief. And I feel guilty even saying that, but it does feel like the collective healing. I am disappointed because I advocated for groups whose experiences I never shared, assuming they would support me. All the feminist organizations, I wonder, where are they? And when October 7th just passed, only 2 people reached out to me, and one was my therapist.
Crazy.
That was crazy. Yeah. So colleagues remain silent. I've been urged to censor myself when speaking up for Jews. Activists have sent me hate emails, leaving me feeling isolated. So since October 7th, I'm definitely more Jewy, and I am building a community that gives me strength to keep speaking out and speaking up. And the community is diverse. I mean, it's a lot of Jews and it's a lot of new friends like Christians and Muslims. And I'm just super grateful for this community that we actually have been building together through the podcast.
I love that. Okay, so here's a question, and maybe we'll end with this one. What do you hope our listener will take away from all of our stories and discussion? And specifically, I wonder, what about the listeners that are not from the Middle East?
Ooh, I love that question. So I hope that listeners, especially DEI officers, DEI members, I mean, I haven't heard of a DEI committee that, hasn't included Jews or anti-Semitism. And I didn't think about it. And I'm a Jew. So now I'm thinking about it post-October 7th. I hope that people will learn to listen to one another with curiosity, because there has been a lot of defensiveness. People have said to me, this isn't comfortable. It doesn't feel good when you are sharing this information that I wasn't inclusive. As if, it's sort of victim blaming. You're telling me something that's not comfortable. I just hope that these conversations that are uncomfortable and they don't feel good, that people can recognize that this discomfort is part of the process.
I love that. I think, being uncomfortable is their only way forward. So I think that healing is about people, right? And if we can only make space for each other's pain to how we're all feeling, acknowledging the suffering for each other, and leaning with curiosity to create a dialogue, not dehumanizing each other, but actually acknowledge it, then great things will come from it, right? From the discomfort. I hope that people will get to know our guests, and that they will listen to them, not already form a response, but listen so they can understand, not to reply, actually listen to their stories and respect their stories. I think the only way that we will get to know each other as people is if we look at them as human beings and not as problems, building bridges of connectiveness. I talk emotions. I can talk emotions all day long. And I think that emotions connects all of us. Fear is something that connects all of us. I mean, I think for all our listeners, if you think about the last moment, the last time that you felt your heart beating really, really fast, or that shakiness, or lightheaded, or that pit in your stomach, we've all been there. We've all experienced fear. It unites us, all of us. But hope unites us all as well. I think there's something about hope that connects all human beings. And we have more things in common than we think. We just need to take a pause and notice it. So as we're navigating these challenging times, I want us to hold the hope together so we can create a space for understanding, for being together. And I can't wait for all of us to come on this journey with us. Let's get started.